Hey folks, good to see you all. I'm sad this will be the second to last time that I'll see you all. I'll be there on Thursday as well, just to hop in and wish you good vibes for your future. This is our last chance to talk explicitly about tech stuff. So hope you all are excited. I think today's lesson will be enjoyable, pretty short. Might be able to get you a little bit of time back and a nice wrap up to what's been a very short little module here on some key ideas and experiences in software development. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Right, excellent. So today we're talking about agile web development, agile processes, agile methodologies, it says here. The term agile is thrown around in a lot of different ways. And while this was originally developed and really popularized by software developers, you might come across agile development no matter where you end up working or what role you end up working in, as it's just a popular way to work now. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So as you all can see on the right, in terms of our schedule, it's pretty quick. We'll go through a couple concepts. I think it's also not really required in here, but we'll sign up for Trello, which is a tool through which you can kind of practice developing stories and Kanban, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. So our plan for today, we're going to talk about and provide a high-level overview of the Agile methodology. This methodology is commonly used by software developers and development adjacent teams worldwide and is viewed as a very intuitive approach to the development lifecycle in general, whether that's adding new features, fixing bugs, creating entirely new products, whatever you might imagine. So we're hoping that by the end of this lesson, you're able to understand the difference between Agile and Waterfall. You can recognize basic Agile terms and processes, and that you are able to think through how to apply these ideas in your own development work. So that is the plan. Hope you're feeling jazzed about it, or at least moderately excited. I'll accept a moderately excited too. That's a-okay as well. All right, so let's talk about Agile. So remember, we recently talked about the software development lifecycle. There were 6 different components to that lifecycle. It was very nicely laid out. Agile is not necessarily doesn't have to be in direct opposition to that. It's sort of a different way to think of that process. So as I says here, we taught you how to do the work, but before we conclude, we should teach you how organizations plan their work. And for this, we're going to look at the Agile methodology. So first of all, methodology is just a fancy word to describe how organizations do something or how something happens. So to track, plan, scope, organize, and assess their work in an ongoing way. The Agile methodology is a project management approach that involves breaking the project into phases and emphasizes continuous collaboration and improvement. Teams follow a cycle of planning, executing, and evaluating. Some of the key phrases I would say here is that this is an approach, right? So it's not a tool necessarily to learn. It's sort of a way of thinking about projects. Something else I would highlight here is continuous collaboration and improvement, and we'll see sort of why that is in just a bit. And this idea of teams following a cycle, so predictable cycle to be able to follow. So before folks were doing Agile, software development was typically done in stages, similar to what we saw with the SDLC, but each of those stages might have been handled by a single department. And then this concept of we do our work and then we throw it over the wall. This is like a pretty kind of common phrase. The idea being that once I've done my part, I shouldn't have to worry about it anymore. I just toss it over. And there's something nice about that. It has like a very factory model to it, right? Of like I'm doing my little thing and then I move it along to the next stage of the process. But what folks have found is that particularly for software development or particularly for any industry that's moving quickly, you end up with a lot of tension between all these different little sections of the project. And that could lead to some negative consequences for the product or delayed timelines, things like that. So just to drill down into this a little bit more. So for example, management would come up with an idea, they would write up the plan, they'd hand it off to a graphic design team, that team would make visual mock-ups. Once that was all done, it would then be given to the development team. And once it was built, it would be given to the QA team to make sure it worked as expected, and so on. So essentially, that SDLC pipeline that we saw. Um, this was often referred to, or could be referred to as a waterfall style. The idea that you're doing one thing, it completes, and then you do the next thing, it completes. You do the next thing, it completes. But the problem here, as I was discussing, this style of work can produce good results, but there are some obvious problems. What if the initial idea was flawed from the start? What if the graphic designers came up with something that's impossible to build? What if users don't actually like the product? In all these cases, the team doesn't find this out until lots of time, money, and energy have been put into the process. Agile was designed to solve this problem. I think a good example of this that might feel immediately relevant is just think from the sort of design stage to the development stage. There's probably a lot of stuff that you all have maybe seen on the web or planned in some of your applications and said, great, I'm gonna do this really cool like video background, and then we're gonna have text floating on top of it. And then you get to actually developing it, and you're like, wow, this is like really challenging or has some constraints that I didn't understand or didn't think about. And before, when just designers were sort of in their own little silo and developers were in their own little silo, you might end up with a situation where if they had just conversed, they might have found a solution that would have been faster, cheaper, easier, whatever the case may be. But because everyone was working on their own and was again tossing things over the wall, they didn't really get to come to that sort of compromise decision. And so if you all have felt that, that is exactly what plenty of companies have felt as well in terms of the planning stages, maybe having big ideas, hoping for a lot, and then you get into actually coding it and you're like, this is actually a bit more complicated. There's some issues here to work out. All right, this lesson has a number of little knowledge checks in it. Let me refresh here. It's saving my options from before. She didn't see anything. Oh, it just saves them. Hmm. Well, that's a bummer. All right, let me see if I can open this up again. It should not do that. We'll just give it a sec. I just go through and check to make sure I've checked the knowledge checks, but that was a failure on my part. All right, here we go. Perhaps you already saw the answer and the explanation's right here, but real quick, what problem is Agile designed to solve? What do you all think? Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Dragosh. Thanks, Chris. Looks like Timo's typing in an answer here. Looks like Omar's typing in an answer here. Yeah, right. We're getting to it. Yeah, so Agile is designed to solve preventing a lot of wasted time, money, and energy. It may lead to some of these other solutions. That's possible, but the main goal is to avoid this waste of time, money, and energy. And down here in the explanation, it'll share. The idea is that by iterating constantly and being in constant communication with other teams, it's less likely features are dead in the water because of a lack of viability, or features are introduced to production vastly different than the initial planning. So the key benefits of following this methodology, um, there are really a number of them. So some are listed here. So first of all, flexibility. Agile allows you to adapt to changes quickly, whether it's new customer requirements or unexpected issues. So again, as we'll see as we move through this process and talk more about sort of what this might look like, the idea being that as soon as you are coming up with an idea, you're maybe communicating with other teams to get feedback on it, maybe even working to get feedback from users before the feature is created in order to see what that process looks like, if it's something that users might want before moving forward with the task. And so it allows you to quickly adapt as you're moving forward with new features and products. It allows for continuous improvement. Regular feedback and retrospectives help the team continuously improve their processes and product quality. I believe this one in particular is talking about, as we'll talk about, like retrospectives. So at the end of a regular amount of time, talking about, hey, how did this, section of time go? Do we need to do anything with our development process to speed it up, make more quality improvements? Versus in a lot of companies, you might end up with a like quarterly or semi-annual review where you may not know things aren't going well until, 4, 5, 6 months have passed. Agile can lead to to more customer satisfaction, frequent deliveries of working software, ensure that the customer gets value early and often. We're really used to this now that like applications will consistently develop new features in, a monthly kind of basis. But this didn't used to be the case. It used to be the case that once you had purchased your product, that's what it was, and you might get an update, once a year, something like that. In team collaboration, so Agile encourages open communication and collaboration, which helps build a strong team dynamic, and when applied correctly, can improve work-life balance. So just in general in this, it means you get to work with more folks, you get to have a better understanding of the overall business that you're working on, even as a software developer. In the past, and certainly probably still at some companies, it was not uncommon for software developers to have their own little fiefdom, their own little kingdom of just sort of their code, and they would hear about constraints and kind of work on whatever their little domain was. It's much more expected now that software developers, certainly are focused on the code, but are have an understanding and appreciation for the business side of things, understand what customers are going through with their product to better make choices when developing features. So to contrast these two things, the idea is that the waterfall process, as it shares over here, is it's like very, very explicit, is that you set out for your project and you have to build the entire thing before it gets delivered. And because you're doing all the steps and then moving on to the next phase, you have to complete each step before moving forward. So again, for an application, from a design perspective, designers would design the entire application, every feature that, the product owners had spec'd out before it even got to move to development. In contrast with the idea of Agile is that you slowly build up the product by isolating the features and following that process that we talked about, that SDLC process, but for individual parts and components of the application. So here, this person's slowly building up the app by adding individual features. And this, particularly once you have a working application, makes a ton more sense because it means you can consistently deliver features. It also leads to the reality of being able to fail faster. And what that means is that if you're going to hit a problem, it's better to hit that problem early with a small like change as opposed to releasing a big application having 15, 20, 30 problems that you're trying to then, put out immediately, right? So failing quickly in terms of, again, putting out features and then being able to immediately see a problem, fix it before you end up releasing 4, 5, 6, 17 bugs. All right, true, false. Agile encourages the idea of failing faster. Hmm, what did I just say? It's hard to remember. Yeah, I think. Does Agile encourage the idea of failing faster? Yeah, right. This is true. So the idea is that we do want to fail faster. And as it says here, wouldn't you rather find out something doesn't work sooner rather than later? And that is the main idea, is that, hey, if we're going to find out something doesn't work, either from a technical perspective, from a design perspective, from a customer understanding or satisfaction perspective, we want to know that soon so that we can fix it and just immediately address it, as opposed to waiting 3 months until 10 other features are ready to go, deliver them all, and then get feedback on a whole bunch of different things. There's a question here. I'm not sure how I would answer this, but do you all have any thoughts? Have you found yourself wishing you would have failed sooner with a project recently? Is there anything that comes to mind? I think experience I've definitely had in the past is working on some idea, being like, "Yep, this is 100% going to work," and then a few hours in, being like, "Wow, I need to do something completely different. I need to take sort of a different tack." Does this resonate for any of you? What do you all think? I don't know. Maybe y'all are just like perfect coders now, right? It's been 24 weeks, so it's probably just 100% every time, right? Have an idea and you're like, yeah, easy. Let me just make that happen. All right, we got several people are typing. We'll give you all a few seconds to respond here, either to your thoughts about this question or to your thoughts about my sarcastic comments. Either are welcome. Dragos says, so what happens to me is that I usually find a very simple solution for something I dealt with, and I feel like, how was I stupid until now? Why did I not see that sooner? I feel like that kind of counts. Yeah, and I hope you don't feel too stupid. This is part of the learning process is trying a bunch of stuff and being like, oh, dang, it was just this. The good news it means that you're learning a ton, and the bad news is that that will happen forever as you work with code because there's no point at which you'll feel like now I 100% understand what I'm doing. It's just part of the process for sure. Omar shares, more than perfection, my goal is acceptable. I think you'll find a software developer that's pretty good. That's that's what a lot of us aim for is just let's get this acceptable and out. I mean, one thing, I know you're kind of goofing here, but one of the things that's nice about the agile process is that you are breaking things down. And so it's kind of part of the process. It's being like, okay, how do we move things forward as opposed to thinking, let me develop to the perfect level. So you're already an agile master, Omar. Joseph shares, I can't remember specifically, but it has happened a number of times. I wished I had made a mistake earlier instead of wasted time for perfection. Yeah. I feel you on this. I'll say, as an educator, doing this kind of spinning your wheels is sometimes part of the learning process. There's definitely a level of diminishing returns, right? It's like the first 20 minutes trying to solve a tough problem, that's your brain really working through it. After 45 minutes, okay, now we're maybe trying stuff out. After a couple hours, that's usually when you're kind of just throwing stuff against the wall, trying to see what sticks. So that's one of the nice things about working with other developers is that after the first 20, 30 minutes of noodling on something, that's when you can go and ask folks for help, ask them to take a look and be like, I can't really figure this out. And they can definitely expedite that process. And again, one of the nice things about Agile, as opposed to working in your silo, you can go and ask other folks for help after you've been spin your wheels a bit trying to figure out how things work. All right, excellent. Thanks for sharing, you all. I appreciate it. Let's move on and talk about Agile principles. Is this the key website? Yeah, there's this website. I looked at this website, I want to say 11 years ago, 12 years ago now, and they have changed nothing, which I love. There are a few parts of the internet that are as untouched as the Agile Manifesto. So this is an initial group who got together and kind of came up with this Agile Manifesto. It's a very simple little statement. There's more details down here for sure, but this is the overall sort of thrust of it. And so it says here, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there's value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. How would you all describe, maybe summarize this manifesto as they write it? What do you all think? What values are trying to come through here? If you had to kind of summarize this idea of individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. What do you think the main values are that they're trying to get across? Sure, Omar says speed is better than perfection. Yeah. So delivering something is better than waiting around until the absolutely perfect, wrap a little bow around it, application is done. Yeah. What do the rest of y'all think? Let me see that several people are typing. I'll give you all a few moments. Mhm. Awesome. These are great ideas all. So Joseph is sharing focus on delivery rather than unnecessary bureaucracy. Yeah, so I think the idea here is that again, we're delivering a product. We're not uh, pushing papers around, right, to try and build something for sure. Asari shares involving the customers throughout the building process. I really like that, right? It's the idea is that we're trying to understand users as opposed to uh, making decisions for them, right? Timo shares a more human-focused approach compared to blindly following rules. Yeah, I definitely get that out of this as well, right? So the idea that we're building software for people, we want them to be happy. We want to respond to their needs, right? And be focused on what the outcome of the product is, not necessarily just fitting into a particular mold. And then Dragos, I really appreciate the statement. So he says, being a gamer, I don't completely agree. We've seen in the past few years that a large majority of the gaming community does not appreciate just speed, but rather quality. Yeah, and so I think this, I'm more than happy to talk about this little bit later as well, but the goal here, I would say, and probably from the initial intention, let's give them sort of our best, assume best intent for these folks. I think they're trying to get at this idea of, yeah, we want to deliver something as opposed to waiting around and making our customers wait. We want to deliver a more human-focused approach. But certainly, if the only thing you take out of this is we don't need to follow a plan, we don't need comprehensive documentation, we don't need processes and tools, just grind to get stuff to work. Um, that's in many ways going against the initial manifesto because, as it says right here, this is often excluded from getting quote from any quotes from this. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. And so a lot of, I mean, any kind of methodology, any kind of process is about finding a balance, right, between all these different concerns. Ideally, you want to do everything. You want to deliver software that is done quickly and done perfectly and meets all the customer needs and is easy to read and develop. That is the hope, but of course, you're having to make trade-offs here. And so what those trade-offs lead to and how much you lean in either direction can certainly lead to a different quality of results. Um, yeah, excellent. Thanks for thinking through this, y'all. Really appreciate it. All right, so we'll see a few different examples of this, and can talk more about what practically Agile looks like. But this is the main idea, right? This is the value that folks are trying to reach. A set of values, I guess I should say. All right, so associated with those lofty values and those goals are a number of rituals, and I will say it may seem like we're going to talk about like a lot of, I don't know, maybe it'll seem sort of abstract. These are concrete things that, like, as a software developer, I've done all of these individually, in many cases on like a weekly or bi-weekly basis, if not a daily basis. So this is the really concrete part of what steps to take to lead towards that vision. So it says here, agile teams tend to be small. Even a larger company will likely break their teams up into several smaller agile teams. They're often multidisciplinary, meaning that your team might have, for example, a developer, a designer, a product manager, and a QA person, sometimes more than one of each. Agile is usually done in sprints, which are 2-week periods in which everyone plans and agrees upon a certain amount of work. But crucially, this is flexible. In each sprint, there are several meetings, sometimes called rituals or ceremonies, which help keep the work moving. So really key term here again is sprints. This is ultra hyper common across the industry. Talk about sprints. It is most common that they are done in a 2-week period, although I will say I've seen and or worked at places where it's been a 1-week sprint or a month-long sprint. Those are kind of the nominations, I would say. Anything shorter or longer than that is not necessarily going to be super helpful, I would, for my personal opinion. So some of the key rituals or ceremonies, first of all, sprint planning. At the beginning of each sprint, the team meets to decide what work needs to be done. The work is broken down into smaller tasks that can be completed within the sprint. Agile recommends that the whole team plans a sprint together so that everyone gets a say. So the idea is that you would sit down. This could be, a 30-minute, hour-long meeting. You're going to talk about, okay, in the next 2 weeks, what are we trying to get done? And ideally delivered by the end of those 2 weeks, which means a feature is worked on and gotten to some completed state. The ideal is it's actually delivered out on the website, but of course it depends on what the feature or the product is. But the goal is that you're at a done state by the end of those 2 weeks. Another common ritual is these daily stand-ups. So every day the team has a short meeting, usually 15 minutes or less, where everyone shares what they did yesterday, what they plan to do today, and any obstacles they're facing. This helps keep everyone on the same page and allows for quick problem solving. Uh, there's been a recent shift to calling these meetings daily huddles, daily sync meetings to be more inclusive of people with disabilities. The idea here initially was that you want to do something uh, slightly uncomfortable or like you're trying to move through this as quick as possible. That's really what I should say. So the daily stand-ups are not there to be like a blocker on your work for the day. It's just a quick way to talk about here's what got done yesterday. Here's what I'm planning to do today, and maybe here's a problem that I'm having. I need someone to maybe help me with this. And that way, everyone every day is on the same page as to what the progress is. It may be the case that progress is stalling because of a few different issues. And as a team, if needed, you might schedule a larger meeting or pair together a few different developers to work on something. Or it may be that things are accelerating, in which case you might discuss, hey, is there anything we can additionally complete as part of this sprint? Or, can we try and do something we haven't done in a while? Like maybe like add a new like technology or try something out with a little bit of the extra time that you have. I've seen stand-ups done a few different ways. The like traditional way, if you're in an office, is you all get together and you're in a circle and you quickly sort of go around and just share these three things: what you did, what you're working on, and anything that's blocking you. But I've also seen folks do it where they're doing like a plank position as they talk to try and make the meeting end as fast as possible. I've seen folks do async stand-ups on Slack where they share out their different tasks throughout the morning so that folks are still able to, perhaps sign on at different time zones, but share in the stand-up. So this can look a lot of different ways. Perhaps most important, working on the task, doing the thing. You're doing the coding, right? So during the sprint, when you talk about things you're going to do, you go ahead and do those. The goal is to complete a functional piece of software by the end of the sprint. This could be, again, a new feature, a new design, all kinds of different stuff. But you're trying to get something done, not be in the middle of a whole bunch of features by the end of the sprint. You then might do some kind of sprint review. So at the end of the sprint, the team demonstrates what they've built to stakeholders, like the customer or product owner. This feedback loop helps ensure the product is heading in the right direction. The goal here is to have a demo. The idea being that if I'm building a small new feature that when I click this button, it's going to show something new on the page, I can actually show that working for whoever the sort of decision maker is. And again, this could be the customer, the product owner, and so that they can see work, the progress is happening, right? Work's happening on this. And if there's any feedback or it's sort of deviating from the initial idea, again, you can move to that stage of failing faster, of getting feedback earlier as opposed to waiting until the entire thing is done. And the last ritual listed here is the sprint retrospective. So after the review at the very end of a sprint, the team meets to discuss what went well, what didn't, and how they can improve in the next sprint. The goal here is not to complain or scold if the team didn't hit its target. That's just data that can help make planning better next time. This sums up the whole agile ethos. The goal is not to be perfect, it's to get better over time. So some common things that might be talked about in a sprint retrospective, it could be, yikes, we didn't plan well for this particular feature that depended on a partner API. We thought it was going to be simpler than it didn't. Next time, let's actually maybe make a task for reading through the documentation, making a test case for the external API before we start to build a feature on it. Or it might be something like, hey, thanks to This person on the team, I was able to complete this feature early, and we were able to, you work together to make the code super nice and can highlight that. It can include things that you want to work on. It can also include positives and shout outs of what went well during the sprint. All right, there's a drop down here. So A in something is a fixed period of time when predetermined work is assigned to developers, designers, etc. What do you all think? Which one of these is the right option here? A what is a fixed period of time when predetermined work is assigned to developers, designers, etc. Give you all a second to think about it and go ahead and share out in the chat. All right, we're getting some answers in. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Asari. Yeah, excellent, y'all. So in this case, it's a sprint, right? So this is a fixed period of time when some of the work that you've decided on doing is assigned to the various people that needs to get assigned to, and the work is done. All right, excellent. Anything else here that's interesting in the explanation? I don't think so. Oh yeah, well I guess one thing that's nice is, the as it says here, the goal, however, is to focus on consistency, so teams across the company are working on the same timeline. If a whole bunch of teams are using a sprint, it allows for a bit of comparison between teams. It allows for teams to be able to have some clear thresholds on which they could hand off work to other teams. So there's something nice as well about defining the structure across the organization. All right, so there are a bunch of terms in Agile, so we'll talk about some of them now. And as you can see, there's a few different parts here, so we'll run through these, but each one can be pretty important. And so as it says here, Agile goes deep. Many books have been written about the ins and outs of the style of working, but most companies don't adopt the Agile methodology wholesale. Here are the most common ideas and practices that you're likely to encounter. This part is very true. If you all want to read books on Agile, you will have reading for the rest of the year if you would like it. Some of the books are good, some of the books are fine. We'll say that. So some key terms here. First of all, sprints, as we discussed, these are 2-week periods around which work is tracked and planned. This term of cards, I feel like I might have said this in the past. So these are sometimes called cards. They could be called stories, tickets, tasks, bugs, some unit of work that's intended to be completed during a sprint. We'll see an example later. Cards refers to sort of how they look or they can look on some sort of visual tool to represent your sprint. Um, and yeah, different companies and management software will call these different things, but whatever it is, it's some single unit of work, and are often called cards. Each card or story should be as concise as possible while containing all necessary details to complete the task, such as requirements, criteria, links to designs, and links to related cards. We'll talk more about this soon enough. The backlog, this is sort of a section where you keep all of your tasks or cards that are not currently being worked on, but may want to get worked on in the future. Often during a sprint, you might recognize or see like, oh, yikes, we really should fix up this code because it's a bit brittle. Or in talking with the product owner about a feature, the product owner might say, that reminds me of something else we wanted to add uh, to make it easier to, buy products on our site. I'm going to go ahead and add a task to the backlog. So it's sort of just a place to keep the different ideas and things you want to work on in the future, but not related to what you're working on right now. A user story is a common term. So Agile encourages teams to look at work from the perspective of the end user. A task is something like code up an enrollment form with JavaScript and React. A story puts the emphasis on the experience of the user. A story for this task might be, or might say, the user should be able to sign up easily from a single screen with minimal info. Most often, the task serves the story. Companies don't always use this delineation, however, so you may hear stories and tasks used interchangeably. The real world is messy. That is very true. So the goal here with a story or user story is again to try and focus it on the perspective of the user. So the difference here is again, as opposed to saying, hey, make this form with these fields that is built with this technology. You're saying, here's what the user should be able to do. This is important for a few different reasons. First of all, it just means you're user-centric. And if you are struggling to transform a task into a story, that might mean that, okay, this isn't really for the user, right? Which could be okay. It could be a task that's internally for the team or maybe for the overall code base. But it's good to be clear about this is something we want to improve user experience versus this is something that is built to, improve our experience as developers. The thing I like about stories in general is that they are implementation agnostic. And so what that means is when we read this, the highlighted part, the user should be able to sign up easily from a single screen with minimal info. It actually gives a lot of leeway in terms of what that might look like. And depending on the type of team, perhaps the size, this allows then the developer, along with the overall team, to figure out more details here, as opposed to having a strict sort of set of bullets to follow. So perhaps the easiest thing to do here is to create a form with JavaScript and React, or perhaps there's some other way that a developer might be able to say, oh, well, we can actually get them to sign up most easily by just adding their email, and then we can connect that to a third service that will bring in some information, right? So this provides a nice level of vagueness where you're still focused on the overall feature, the overall goal, but developers then are able to add their expertise about what this might look like to reach this goal. Personas is another word that might come up to support user stories. Teams will often come up with personas, which are fictional people created to represent the different demographics of people that might use the product. I think you all talked about this as part of the UX and UI section, if I remember correctly. And so the example here is like perhaps if you're building an app that caters to the elderly, you might come up with a persona named Sally, who is 78 years old, lives in Texas, and needs to use the product, but isn't very comfortable with computers. Personas just give you all the chance to think from a very specific user perspective that ideally is pretty demonstrative of a typical user who uses the application. Scrum, a term originally from rugby, it describes the cyclical, iterative process of working in this way during sprints. The team member responsible for shepherding this work is often called the Scrum Master. There's more details here. This is sort of added in as part of the Agile methodology of someone who's managing the overall process. And then Jira and Trello, these are two of the most popular pieces of software for tracking work in an agile way. Tasks are organized into stories, tickets, tasks, bugs, cards, whatever you want to call them, and are tracked on a board. And we'll talk more about this soon. All right, just a few more here. I know there's a lot to learn here. So limiting work in progress. So one of the key principles of Agile is focus. The whole process of tracking work this way is to enable focus on whatever is currently highest priority. As such, in most cases, a team member should never have more than 2 or 3 stories, tasks, tickets assigned to them at one time. So just to restate this a bit, you'll end up with a whole bunch of different cards that might be distributed amongst your team. And as a developer, the idea is that you're doing one thing at a time as best as possible. So if you're working on the feature to add a new button to show information on the user profile, that's the thing you're working on. That's it. Not picking up and starting, but not finishing a number of tasks. There's a number of benefits to this. One is that when you're working on just one thing, as soon as you finish, you should be able to go back to the sprint, look at what cards are available, and grab a new one without having to then talk to a bunch of people, be like, oh, are you in the middle of this one? Or did you already do some work on this, right? It's much more beneficial to start and end something as opposed to kind of spreading out amongst multiple tasks. It may be the case that you end up with 2 or 3 tasks. This often happens if, for example, you might end up with like one larger task that's going to take some time, and you might pick up another task or two, either because of urgency or because it's maybe just a little bit easier and something you can kind of work on in tandem when you need kind of a break from the big task you're working on. So story points are another concept here, a relative measurement of the effort required to complete a task. They don't directly correspond to hours. They're used to describe the complexity of the project. Most companies use the following as potential story point values: 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Very small tasks could be a 1, and most companies will try to break 8s and 13s into smaller tasks. So up Updating the title on page might be a 1, whereas building a full calendar widget might be an 8. So a couple of important ideas here. So the idea is that for each task, you're assigning some point value to it. And as it says here, the goal is not to say, I think this is going to take me 3 hours. You really want to avoid that kind of measurement. First of all, as new developers, you won't know. You won't know how necessarily long it'll take. Also, what is 3 hours for some people might be 1.5 hours for a different person, might be 2 hours for someone else, right? Everyone kind of works at different speeds. Also, developers who maybe have had the same years of experience may just have expertise in different areas. So you want to be a bit more abstract than that. And the idea here is that you're really trying to give some kind of relevant measurement amongst all the other stories and on your team. This, I would say, is the most like one of the most creative or fungible parts of the entire process. Each team starts to figure out over time, pointing stories, what kind of a 1 means and what a 5 means. It's very imprecise. And so it does not directly relate to time. It doesn't directly relate to some kind of particular like deadline. It's a relative measuring of how difficult you and the team think this might be. Velocity is a measurement of how fast the team moves relative to past and future sprints. Teams assign an arbitrary but consistent score to each task to describe the amount of work. That's what we described up here. For example, update the about page copies, probably a small task, might have a score of 1, where something like build an interest rate calculator might have a score of a 5 or even an 8. These numbers don't describe the amount of time it should take. It's more like points in a video game. Yes, as Omar says, all about the vibes. Indeed. So the idea of velocity is that you point all these different stories, and then at the end of a sprint, maybe you get a total of 27 points. I don't know. Totally depends on the tasks you're doing. And as sprints continue, you start to get a sense of, okay, as a team, if we're pointing things correctly, or at least finding an internal consistency on what points mean, each sprint we can pretty confidently do about maybe 20 points worth of work. That allows product owners to then have a better sense when they're working on stories and trying to plan out how long something's going to take, how many weeks in advance a feature might be done. And it also helps as a team for you all to better understand, okay, this is kind of what our limit is at right now. If we are being asked to get up to 27, 30 points done, we might need a new team member or someone else added who can share some of the work. So it's a good measurement tool that is determined by the folks who are actually working, which is really nice. All right, last page in these different terminologies. So MVP, I'm sure you all heard this before. Again, the UI UX section. So MVP stands for minimum viable product. And it's often used as a target. What's the smallest, simplest version of this product that we can build that still has value so that customers can start testing it ASAP. And as we talked about, you can begin to fail faster, get that feedback, and begin to iterate on the product. Pull versus push. So in a true agile environment, team members pull the task they're ready to work on rather than having work pushed to them. So the idea being that you work on a task, you complete it, you maybe move it to a review stage or something else. And while that's happening, you're the one deciding, hey, I'm going to go ahead and pick up this ticket. This is what I would like to work on next, as opposed to having the manager sit around and delegate each task to each individual person. The idea of iterative development, as we said, the ethos of Agile is about iteration, continual improvement rather than perfection. So trying to deliver, what was it, I think was what Omar was saying was acceptable work, right? Let's get to a good state where should be good, should be usable, customers should be happy with it, but there might be additional features we could add in the future. That's okay. We're trying to get the sort of first version of this out and done. And then finally, an epic, the term epic is used to describe a major goal that we'll be working toward across multiple sprints. For example, launching the redesigned company website is an example of something that would make a good epic, probably taking multiple sprints to finish. You can think of it as epics have a whole bunch of sprints in them. Each sprint is going to be comprised of a number of stories. All those would build up to some large overarching change in the overall application. So again, it could be an entirely new product shared on the website, like a new product offering or a new way to use the website, or a revamp of a whole bunch of features all at the same time. The epic is kind of the big idea whereas each task or story or card should be much more individualistic and should be able to be completed within a sprint. All right, while y'all are vibing, let's do this fourth knowledge check. One of the ways Agile solves the problem of waterfalls by turning work into more manageable chunks. When all of the work is compiled, it's often turned into a, what do you think? Which one of these? When all the work is compiled, it's often turned into a what? All right, got some answers from folks. Answers from Omar. Sorry, everyone's saying user story. Let's go ahead and check. Excellent. Yeah, so the answer here is user story. Epics consist of multiple user stories and typically take multiple sprints to complete, whereas user story should be completed within the context of a single sprint. So each of those chunks is going to be a user story. All right. Other interesting points could just be agile terminology, part five. I think they just didn't want to keep adding parts onto this. So there's a couple other things that integrate with agile, but are not necessarily like solely about the agile methodology. One of these is the concept of Kanban. So Agile adopts several important principles from Kanban, a Japanese management style popularized by Toyota. So today, the term Kanban is used specifically to describe describe visual project tracking, like that seen with Jira or Trello. So Jira and Trello each use interfaces inspired by Kanban boards, tracking work visually as it moves through different stages. At a glance, work status is super helpful and keeps the team on the same page. At any time, anyone in the team can look at the board and see exactly who's working on what. So we'll see an example of this both via Jira and with Trello. But you can kind of see up here, it's not really the best example. They're essentially like different chunks of a board, and the idea is that you are marking progress along that board. Another concept that kind of comes up is this idea of five whys. Anytime there's an issue, ask why. When you get an answer, ask why again. Doing this five or more times can lead to important insights about the root cause of the given issue, and it's often not what you expect. Good retrospectives are often built around this practice and can be very useful for improving subsequent sprints. This is a powerful management technique that can be applied equally well to managing your own life. So the idea here is that you are trying to get to the root cause of problems as opposed to just reacting to initial problems. And as I mentioned, Agile is used in many other industries, not just software engineering, healthcare, finance, marketing, and more can all benefit from working with Agile. And again, the principle of Agile is that we're delivering work that is human-centric, that is a bit quicker than what a waterfall process might be, and plenty of industries can benefit from that. All right, excellent. We have some small images to look at, which we will expand in size. So we're going to take a look at just some examples of Jira. Jira is a really popular tool that is a task management tool, has a gazillion features added to it to make it interesting and useful. And so we'll talk through some of those now just so you can get a little sense of it. And then I think we'll actually probably just take our break. And then we come back, we'll jump into Trello. We'll have you all make a Trello board, and then we'll do the small project at the end of this exercise. So we'll use Jira for our examples here, but these same principles can apply to most of the common project management software packages. This main view that we're looking at here, this is essentially a Kanban board. The idea is that we have a column here for what is left to do, a column here for what is currently in progress, and a column here for what has been completed. The idea is that in each sprint, you would have this kind of Kanban board, and all of your tasks at the very beginning will start all the way at the left over here at to do. And then as developers begin working, they pick up tasks, move them into in progress, and once they've been completed, they move to done. There's more that could be added here. For example, there could be a step in between for some of those things we talked about in the SDLC, the software development lifecycle. That could be testing, user testing, doing code reviews, all kinds of things could fit in here. But the main idea, again, is that you have this sort of snapshot look at where each feature is at any given moment in time. So we see here are a bunch of different cards. You can see these are individual little Just little rectangles that have a tiny bit of information on it, and we'll talk more about what goes into a card. There's a bit of detail on here as well. There's some checkboxes here. There's some tags as to what these are related to. Perhaps these are epics, as well as a brief description of what the specific task is. So a typical Jira project will have the following columns in which cards can be placed. So these are four. I'll talk about a few others as well. So ready, these are the cards that have been brought into the current sprint but haven't been picked up by anyone yet. It's the leftmost column, and cards here should be ready for work. As we saw in the previous image, it could also be called to do or something like that. In progress, these represent the cards that are, well, actually in progress. As we said, team members should only have 1 to 2 things in progress at a time. For review, so we didn't see this column, but I briefly spoke about this. So once a task seems done, it's moved into this column where a stakeholder tests and approves it. A review column could typically be where maybe a code review will happen, tests are run against it, feedback is going on within that process. And then done, cards in this column are done. This usually means launched or merged or resolved, depending on what your team decides to do. Some teams will decide to merge all their code in. So going back to when we talked about Git and GitHub, done might look like, great, the code is merged in, and only at the end of the sprint are we going to deploy all of our changes to our users. For other teams, it might be the case that when something is really done, that means it's been reviewed, merged, and deployed, and that's when it actually gets to the done state. So as people pick up tickets and move them through the process, they'll update the cards and drag and drop them into the relevant column. So here we have a slightly updated view here for this sprint. And the idea is that as an individual, you can assign yourself to these and drag them around as needed. So each card should ideally contain all the info necessary to complete the task and nothing else. So here we'll look at the anatomy of a Jira card. So on the front side, it should be pretty simple. It should just have the description of the task. You might see like a profile picture of who's assigned to it and some information about maybe like what board it's attached to or a tag or something like that. On the back side of the card, or once you click in, you might see a bunch of more information. So here we can still see that title. We can still see sort of what it's associated with, but we can see more information about who's assigned to it, who is involved in like reporting on it or reviewing it. Comments are often added here so that everything's kind of in the same place. There might be a description involved. This was a bug. It might have screenshots of what had happened. You might have additional labels to this that could be things like, certain levels of priority. All kinds of information can be on the back side of a card. I would still say, ideally here, there's going to be certain cards that require technical input and details. But if you're going from a user story perspective, ideally the description here is about what the desire is for the future, what the goal is, not something specific like go ahead and use this database table and these fields to build this out, unless that's what your team has decided to do. In general, you want this to contain all the information for a developer to pick it up and begin working. And then finally, for the backlogs, cards that have been created but aren't a part of the current sprint are placed in the backlog. The backlog is a place for all non-sprint cards, and the sprint is usually planned by adding cards from the backlog to the sprint during sprint planning. So a lot of key terms there. Just to go through a little bit in finer detail. So a backlog could be a different board entirely. It also just might be part of that initial sprint board where you have a bunch of those tasks that you maybe talked about as a group and you're just not prioritizing just yet. I would say this is also kind of if you have an idea, but you haven't really thought out all of the concept for it, often that might fall in the backlog as well. So as sprint planning begins, that's the beginning of a sprint. You'll go ahead and talk with your team about what should we get done this sprint. Typically, cards are pulled from the backlog, and that's what's added to the sprint. So that's a time as well. You can start to poke through the backlog cards and say, do we need more details on this? Let me make sure I can ask some questions to better understand what the task is at hand before moving that into the current sprint. All right, and that is a little tour there. So a really quick knowledge check before we move ahead. Oh, I'm so sorry. I clicked around too much. All right, whenever work needs to be completed, but it's not ready to be pulled into a sprint, it is placed where? In which one of these? is it placed? Whenever work needs to be completed, but it's not ready to be pulled into a sprint, it's placed where? What do you all think? Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Azarian. Yeah, thanks, Joseph. This isn't the best drop down. We didn't even talk about these things, right? So it's clearly one of these two. In this case, yes, exactly. You're looking to put things in the backlog. I like this little paragraph. So the last thing you want to do is pull in more work that can be completed. However, a very real problem is leaving work on the backlog and never returning to it. This is something you can do as a new developer is, excuse me, is take the initiative of keeping an eye on the backlog to make sure things don't fall through the cracks. Just be careful on how you bring attention to this. You want it to come off as arrogant or accusatory. It is often the case as a new developer, you'll show up to a job and there's a lot of stuff on the backlog or a lot of tickets that haven't been tackled yet. That's probably why they're hiring you, is to help tackle some of these things. That's okay. Backlogs are a bit of a wish list sometimes. So it's normal for backlogs to grow in size. Ideally, product owners are keeping an eye on that to make sure it doesn't get too unwieldy and becomes useless as a planning tool. All right, we have an exercise here. I'm going to say that before we dive into this, let's go ahead and take our break. So we'll do a 10-minute break here till 10 minutes after the hour. And when we come back, we'll jump into Trello and then we'll jump into the exercise itself. So I'll see you all in about 10 minutes.
Awesome. I will start up the timer.
Thanks. All right. Hey, folks. Welcome back. Hope you had a nice break. Probably the last one. Oh, is there a break on Thursday? Maybe that was the last chance to listen to some nice music. All right, excellent. Well, I hope you all are doing well. Let's go ahead and dive in. We're gonna go ahead and just play around Trello a little bit. This is not explicitly part of the lesson, but it's pretty easy to do, so might as well give it a shot. And since we have some time, might as well get to it. So I'm gonna ask you all to go to Trello.com. I'll go ahead and share the URL in our live chat. I like Trello. I'm a little bit more familiar with it, and they have a free version that's pretty easy to get up and running. So I figure we'll try that. Trello and Jira are quite similar in a number of ways. Uh, Jira is a bit more enterprisey, I might say. So to get started with Trello, you all can click on this Get Trello for free or create an account, whatever it might be up here. Once you do so, you can enter your email or choose one of these options to sign up. I'm gonna go ahead and just log in. Once you do sign up, you might be asked a few questions about like, how are you using this? Or what's your goal with Trello? Make a board. You can just click skip for all of those. The goal where you're trying to get is, let's see if this works here. All right, you're trying to get to something that looks like this. That is the goal. So go ahead and take a few minutes to do that. And then just give me a thumbs up in the chat once you're able to get to a page that looks like this. It should create a board for you as long as you don't select any of those options of what to do. So I'll give you all a minute or two to try and get to this page. Excellent. Thanks, Sorry. Glad that worked quick for you. Looks like Asana. Yeah, it does. I think a lot of these tools look very similar. They all have the same kind of bright color, bubbly look. A lot of them share features as well. Excellent. Thanks, Joseph. Looks like you're there. Give everyone just another minute or so to sign up and try and get to this kind of page. Fun. Thanks, Timo. Appreciate it. All right, if you're still getting signed up, thanks, Omar. Please continue to do so. Hopefully, it doesn't take too long. If you get stuck somewhere, let me know. If you somehow get thrown back to your like main workspace over here, you should be able to find something that just says like my Trello board or something like that. Excellent, thanks, Chris. That should bring you to a page like this. So what we're looking at is our Trello board, because there's a number of different tabs and things up here. We'll just poke through a few things on this page. All right, let's get out of here. There are some places to add members. There are different premium features, like looking at things in a table or in a calendar, and you have access to your boards over here. This little sidebar can be collapsed, so you can just take a look at the overall board itself. This board is set up to be a Kanban board. It might look familiar, right? So we have to do, we have doing and done. Doing is just another way to say in progress. If you want to change the title of any of these columns, you can click on the title itself and then just go ahead and type in. You can also add new lists, right? So if you wanted to add a in review column, we can do so. You can also drag these lists around by just clicking and dragging. So this way from left to right, this might be the progress that each card should follow. I could also make a backlog column, and then I could drag that all the way to the end over here. So say this is a pretty typical Kanban board for software development. So you have your backlog, you have your done, and then these three steps in between as software developers is where you're going to do the most amount of work. To do, you pick up some cards. In progress means you're working on it, and in review. Each of these little individual cards, you can add a new one by clicking down here and type in whatever the card is. So add a new user registration form, maybe something like that. You can also click in and you can get more detail on everything that's happening with that card. So this is where you would add a description of what needs to happen. You can add people to it. You can add checklists or particular dates. You can change some of the look of this. There's a lot of things you can do here. If you wanted to edit the text, you can do so from out here by clicking Edit Card. And that'll give you some options as well as just the ability to edit the title. So maybe I want to write this more as a user story. So I could say, as a new user to the website, I want an easy way to sign up for an account. So maybe that's what I would do there. You can also assign yourself. So this join button here means I'm attached to it. And ideally, when you're working with a big team of people, you would see everyone's faces on individual cards. You can then drag your card over to in progress because this might be something that I'm working on, right? As I work on this, I might add comments, push up code, do whatever it needs to do. And at the point where I'm ready to deliver it, I'd move it to in review, and perhaps one of my team members would review my code and my overall progress. So pretty easy to use, to write with. I would say pretty intuitive. There are a number of other features in here. There's all kinds of different automation things you can do. You can do stuff like whenever a card is added to in progress, add these specific tags to it. Don't let cards move to this column unless certain things are met. You could start to highlight cards if they're past a certain date. All kinds of different things that you can add to this. But this is the main features of what you're going to do with your kind of Kanban board and a tool like Trello. But again, lots of other things you can do. Oh, and most importantly, wait, how do I? Yeah, if you want to change the background, hit this little menu over here. I mean, you all want to like, really style up your Trello board. You can pick different colors in here. Ooh, cool, like space gray. Love that, love that. This one has a volcano emoji. That seems intense. I don't know about that. I'm partial to this pink. I just gotta be honest. I think it's real cute. There's different photos you can add, all kinds of stuff. To sort of design this out to be something actually kind of pleasant to look at as well. Uh, you can add as well cover colors or images too. Um, Perhaps you want to signify different types of uh, cards or something like that. So all kinds of really neat little features to add for Trello. Let me pause here. Any questions on any of this Trello stuff before I move ahead? Tatiana says it's very intuitive. Cool. Tatiana says it's cool. I believe it. I agree. I think it seems kind of cool. It's actually really nice. I've gotten my partner to use this for like managing their tasks with all kinds of stuff. I'll use this just to plan for like parties and things. You know, this is just a nice way to manage stuff you have to do. So surely with software development, this can be, pretty useful, but these kind of tools are helpful in all kinds of different ways. So hopefully at the very least, you all walk away today with a nice new tool to maybe help manage some, if not software projects, some other projects you may have. All right, let's get over to the task. Excuse me. So we have a little exercise here just to practice some of our agile planning. So let's take our recipe sharing project from module 8, long, long ago, months and weeks ago, and break the work down into tickets. Of course, we are now at our new job and working on an agile team, so we'll have some help. So many companies, when planning a new product or project, will create a one-page brief describing the new project and its goals. Here's the brief your team has been given. So the new product is Recipe Mania, the online destination for all your culinary dreams, a website where users can sign up, create recipes, search, and share them with anyone they want. You can share recipes via buttons for each major social media network. You can remix an existing recipe and make it your own, and you can request recipes on the community board. How will this make money? We'll have ads after every third recipe viewed, and we'll have a subscription option to remove the ads and give users little badges on their profile, and then a anticipatory timeline. So for technology, vendors, and hosting, these decisions will all need to be made by the tech team at the project's outset. So what we want to do is we want to break down the overall work, and we're going to do so thinking from sort of a developer and user perspective. So it says here, typically developers don't make every ticket for a project. Product manager might come to us with big chunks of work, and we'll call these our stories. So we're going to try and break down these larger tickets into some smaller tasks and steps. So one of the first stories here is users should be able to create accounts and log in. Second story is users should be able to add and save recipes, and users should be able to find recipes and share them via a link or social media. So these are sort of the three big ideas. As software developers, we want to break this down a little bit more so that they're individual tasks. So let's start with this first one. Users should be able to create accounts and log in. I'll go ahead and walk through this one with you all, and then I'll hand it over to you all to do the next two. So what I might do is go over to my Trello board. I'll first just add something in our backlog over here and just copy this over. So users should be able to create accounts and log in. And there's a number of tasks that might be associated with this. One of the slightly, I don't know, fungible, maybe confusing things about doing planning like this is there's not actually a right size for any particular story, and there's not really a right sort of like size for like things like epics, right? So we might say, okay, this maybe the story is small enough as is something we can complete in 2 weeks. In this case, it's suggesting we break this up in some way. So let's think about how we can break this up into some smaller tasks here. So users should be able to create accounts and log in. So I might break this up in a few different ways. I might say something like create a sign up page for new users that collects only essential information. Create a login page for returning users that collects their email, and we'll say password. And then we might say create a landing page for users to arrive at when they log in successfully. So that may be a few different tasks that might come up from this. I think there's a few other tasks we could add to this. What do y'all think? What might be some additional tasks that would be related to this larger idea of users should be able to create accounts and log in? Is there anything else you can think of we might need to do or might want to do, just brainstorming some ideas that would be associated with users should be able to create accounts and log in? What do y'all think? I don't think any other features we could maybe add. Anything else you want to detail more explicitly? Nice. Thanks, Joseph. Yeah. So Joseph suggests form validation here. So let's do that. So implement form validation on the sign up page for all relevant and required fields. And we probably want another one here that's implement form validation on the login page for email and password. Excellent. Love that. Any other tasks here that we could split out from this overall idea? All right, and I think it's pretty good. I can maybe also say create a landing page for new users that is aimed at showing them around the application. This might even come with more tasks associated with it as well to really build that out. We could think these might be a good starting set. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and clean up this page. There should be a way to archive these different cards. So I can hit archive here. I could delete as well once they are archived. I don't think I need any of these template cards. And at that point, then we have our backlog. We've split this larger task into a whole bunch of smaller ones. So I'm going to get rid of that. And now we have a bunch of tasks here. There's more detail for sure we could add to these. And we could also translate these to be more user story centric. So for example, if I wanted to translate this from create a sign up page for new users that collects only essential information, maybe I would say something like, um, as a user, I want to be able to sign up for Recipe Mania by being able to provide important but minimal information, something like that. So lots of different ways we could structure this data, could structure these cards overall. All right, let me pass it over to you all. There are two other larger stories here that we could probably break up. Go ahead and take a few minutes. I'll add, we'll say 6 or 7 minutes on the timer to add some new cards that are related to users should be able to add and save recipes, and users should be able to find recipes and share them via a link or social media. As you're thinking of these, think about, okay, what do I imagine the look and feel of this website is going to be? What kind of pages would I need to click to get to these different activities, different actions? That'll help you build out your individual stories. All right, if you have any questions, let us know in live chat. If you feel like you got to a good spot and you're done, go ahead and let us know in live chat. And I'll go ahead and put up a 6 minute timer and we'll go from there. We'll say 6:30 timer. Nope. Sure. There we go. Got the recording? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, excellent. Y'all, hopefully you had a little bit of time to work through these large stories and break them into smaller tickets. What were some tickets you all came up with for either the second story, users should be able to add and save recipes, or users should be able to find recipes and share them via a link or social media? What are some smaller tasks or stories that you all came up with? What do y'all think? You could copy a few out and share it in chat. If you want to do a screenshot, that's a-okay as well. What do y'all think? Some smaller stories or tasks for number two and number three? Excellent. Thanks for sharing, Joseph. Joseph shared a few tasks. I create a form for users to add a new recipe, implement form validation for the form, users to add recipes, choose and implement a backend database to store recipes, create a share button to enable users to share a recipe on social media. Excellent, thank you. Other folks, what all did you add to break up these larger stories into smaller stories? Excellent. Thanks, Omar. So he said for number two, create a form, implement form validation, create a database, make sure that the recipe is saved in the database. Yeah, sure. All right, excellent, y'all. There are some solutions down here. And as it says here, there's many correct solutions. There's not really a right way necessarily to do this. It just depends on what makes sense. They have some suggestions here for similar creating recipes table in the database, adding a form to add a recipe, and saving the recipe to the database. And for this last one, it looks here like being able to find recipes would be something like create a form to search, querying the database, update component to show results. There might be something on here of connect with different social media sites, right? There could be a lot of different tasks depending on how you imagine the application coming together. Next step here that we'll close out with is scoping. So for each of the tickets you created above, think about how much work is involved and go ahead and assign a story point value to each ticket. Let's go ahead and just do that for some of the ones that we detailed here. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. How you might do that over here. So with Trello natively, there's not like a way to add points depending on some tools are created and they have like a clear spot for where to add points for things. It could be instead you could add a label. So these labels over here are customizable. You can create new labels. But you could even just sort of add in here the different values. Maybe I'll say one is a green, two is yellow, three is orange, five is red, eight is purple, and blue will be 13. So remember, these are all pretty relative, right? The idea is just we're sort of saying, here's our sliding scale. And the reason they start to increase is sort of to give, I think, a sense of, hey, it's starting to get really big, right? As opposed to just one, two, three, four, five. So if you're scoring something at 13, that should feel like, whoa, this is like a huge task. We really need to break this down. So let's take a look at the few that we have over here. and start to think, how easy do we think this is? So let's take a look at this first one. So as a user, I want to be able to sign up for Recipe Mania by being able to provide important but minimal information. So this could include a perhaps a call to a database or an authentication service. This could include putting together a form. What do you all think? How would you rate this in terms of difficulty? There's again not a right answer here. You could say 1 or 13, and they would both be correct answers depending on how you feel about it. But what do you all think for this task? How would you score this task? All right, we got a 3 from Joseph, got a 2 from Omar. How about the rest of y'all? Just gotta come up with a number here. How difficult do you feel like it is? Roger says 7. Seven's not an option. Perhaps you mean 8. Chris says 3. Team is wiggling between 2. I'm not sure that's 2 or 5 or 2.5. In this case, there's no sliding scale. We're just picking one of the numbers. All right, Jocker says 13 then, lucky number then. Yeah. All right, excellent. We're vibing out, it feels like. So we have a few different options here, right? Everyone's sort of saying a few different values. This is actually a normal part of the process. So as developers, what would typically happen is we'd all sort of maybe put up a number of fingers or say out loud, here's how many points I think it is, and then we'd start to discuss. At this point, we say, okay, well, Dragos thinks it's gonna be really difficult. Dragos, maybe you have some ideas as to why this is so difficult. Why did you point it like that? Maybe Dragos might say something like, well, this means we have to figure out the database call, we have to figure out an authentication strategy, we have to figure out, all these different steps to do it. On the other end, maybe we'd say, Omar, why do you think this would be a 2? And maybe Omar would say something like, well, we just need to put together a form. Maybe we already have an authentication service we're going to use. It's really just a matter of connecting a few different pieces of our application. So after discussing, ideally we'd come to, if not a compromise, then at least some sort of agreement around, okay, after talking through the details here, this is probably a 3 or a 5 or something like that. I'll go ahead and I'll just mark this as a 5, but again, there's no right answer here. I just want to pick something to move it on. Let's do a couple more of these before we close out. So let's take a look at this one. So create a login page for returning users that collects their email and password. What do you all think? If you were going to score this as some points, how difficult does this seem? And now let's say we scheduled the other one as a 5. You can sort of use that as a connecting tool as well. All right, sorry, it says 2. Which is probably a 2 or a 3, just the same 2. And we're rolling towards agreement. I love it. So this is another good example, right? With something like this, we might discuss and sort of all agree, like, hey, this is kind of what I think it might be. We could score it as a 2. Tatiana jumped in to say an 8, right? And so if one person is outstanding, we might ask that person, what do you think that makes this much more difficult? And maybe that would persuade some of the folks who have scored it a 2 of like, oh, yikes, you're right. This is definitely more difficult than we initially thought. Or maybe it would be able to persuade some of Tatiana's fears, like, actually, this is a little bit easier, I think, than maybe you're thinking. Or no worries, Tatiana. I think that's fair. I think there's actually a lot of things to do here, but we're playing around. And so that's the process we would follow as part of a sprint planning meeting. Ideally, before this meeting happens, first of all, these would be much more filled out, right? We're just kind of filling in some examples here. But before the meeting as well, hopefully the developers have had a little bit of a chance to read through these cards in advance, kind of have an idea of, okay, here's kind of what I'm thinking in terms of difficulty. That way the meeting is as productive as possible. All right, I think I can pause there. Any questions about Trello, this process of making stories or cards or appointing? Any questions you all have? Yeah, thanks for the question, Joseph. Joseph asks, is Jira similar to Trello? So yeah, I would say so. They have a lot of similar features overall. There are certainly going to be just some differences in terms of how they look, and perhaps some integration. In my experience, Jira has a bit better of an ability with like large organizations to connect and manage lots of different tasks to different parts of the org. So you might have dozens of different boards associated with different teams, and those tasks might show up, be able to get like aggregated in different ways. Um, but it just kind of depends. In my experience, Trello is typically used for smaller organizations, and Jira has been used for large organizations. So it doesn't actually surprise me that you're saying you're seeing Jira more. I think it's pretty typical depending on the types of job descriptions you're looking at. But they have a lot of the same functionality for sure. Yeah, I'm sure actually if you try with Jira, you might be able to sign up for a free trial or something like that. You could certainly give it a shot. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it. Any other questions on this? Or anything else on Agile? It's our last content meeting together, y'all. Anything else? Any lingering questions you all want to ask before we head out? And I don't get to yammer at you anymore about technical things. I mean, anything else you're curious about? Let me see a few folks typing. I'll give you all a second to do so. Mm. Excellent. Thanks, Omar. Excellent. Thanks, Tatiana. All right. Sounds like folks are good. Cool. Well, excellent. It's been a pleasure. I hope you all have had some fun in these lessons. Really appreciated being a part of your journey as you all have been developing your skills as software developers. It's been super fun. Had a good time with you all. Hopefully, you don't mind me goofing you all a little bit every once in a while. It's made things, I hope, more entertaining. And with that, congrats again to the last end of our content lesson. So on Thursday, we'll all be back together. I'll see you all then to celebrate your successes, and hopefully not ask too much of you all other than just to be psyched about the getting to the end of the experience. I think that's all I have to say. See you one, folks. Anything else that you want to add before we end out for today?